Bem-vindos a mais um vídeo do Conhecimentos da Humanidade. Estamos aqui hoje com o Bruno Lanaro. Mentira, o Bruno não está aqui hoje.
Mudou um pouquinho.
Mudou um pouquinho, tá com a barba, aí o cabelinho, tá muito diferente. Mas eu estou aqui hoje com o Rogério Bettoni, da editora Palimpsesto, certo, Rogério? Como é que você está?
Certíssimo. Tudo bem, você? Prazer estar aqui mais uma vez. Muito obrigado.
Olha aí, a gente está aqui hoje por uma missão muito especial, que é trazer uma entrevista muito importante aqui para nós com um magista, vamos dizer assim, internacional. Olha só, hoje é dia de entrevista internacional e tem um propósito essa entrevista, né? O primeiro por causa do Sofia, o Simpósio de Ocultismo e Filosofias Arcanas. A gente vai ter uma palestra dele lá com a gente, contando um pouco sobre a trajetória dele, um pouco sobre o trabalho dele na magia e também porque a editora está traduzindo os trabalhos dele para a língua portuguesa, certo? Fala um pouquinho para nós aí.
Exatamente. A gente está trazendo um livro dele, principalmente o primeiro livro, né, que é o mais esperado dele aqui, que é o Magia Avançada para Iniciantes. Nesse momento, acho que as pessoas já devem saber de quem que a gente está falando. Mas a campanha está no ar no Catarse e, assim, o financiamento está indo super bem. Além desse livro, a gente vai trazer alguns livretos, é quase a obra dele toda. Não vamos trazer tudo porque não dá tempo, então a gente traz essa parte agora e no ano que vem a gente traz o restante.
Até porque é bastante coisa, né?
É, bastante coisa.
Boa. Então, ó, quem quiser conhecer o projeto, já está no ar lá no Catarse, catarse.me/Chapman, Chapman. Aí você pode conferir lá, e a gente já está dando aqui o sobrenome do convidado. Então, nada mais justo do que a gente já começar a introdução, apresentá-lo para trazê-lo aqui para o nosso ao vivo, para a gente conversar com ele. A entrevista vai ser em inglês, pessoal, mas a partir de agora a gente vai virar essa chave para o inglês. Mas teremos legendas aqui para vocês acompanharem o nosso entrevistado no dia de hoje. Então, falando um pouquinho dele, a jornada dele se iniciou ali pelos anos 2000. Ele se apresentava como professor de meditação, já estudava Telemann, estudava Magia do Caos e publicava as reflexões dele em um site que chamava The Bat's Head, certo? É isso, Rogério? O nome do site?
Mesmo.
Que ele manteve entre 2006 e 2009 com um amigo dele, que é o Duncan Barford, certo? Ele foi gerando esse material de reflexões dele, foi trazendo um material baseado em iluminação, em grande obra, e publicou a primeira trilogia dele, The Blood of the Saints, The Urn e o Desert of Roses. A Desert of Roses.
Desert of Roses.
Boa. E aí ele foi, então, buscando sempre uma linguagem mais direta, uma linguagem mais simples, e aí ele lançou Magia Avançada para Iniciantes. Gosto muito desse nome. Já foi membro da IoT, que é os Iluminados de Thanateros. A gente já falou dos Iluminados de Thanateros aqui no canal, mas dentro dessa vivência, dentro dessa mentoria, essa vida mágica dele levou ele a fundar a própria ordem dele. Então, nosso convidado tem uma ordem dele, que é a Ordomagia, que é derivada da Arcanum Arcanorum, que é aí um ramo, né, da Telema, da Astro Argento. Em 2009, ele acabou promovendo um retiro numa montanha na Grécia, e aí desse retiro acabou nascendo um livro, que é o Magia, que será publicado ano que vem, certo?
Que é esse aqui.
Olha esse livro aí, que bacana.
Que é um grande, longo poema sobre magia. É um negócio bonito, assim, mas é bonito demais.
Legal. Sabe? E aí hoje ele tem um podcast, que é o Warp FM, com o Duncan, que é um amigo dele. E se você quiser saber mais coisas sobre ele, só visitar o site Barbarous Words, que lá nós temos várias informações, inclusive se você procurar lá a Ordomagia, você também vai encontrar o site na internet. Então, sem mais delongas, com vocês, Alan Chapman. Hi!
Hello, Rogério.
Hello, my friend. Please tell me you understood everything we said.
Of course, yeah. All good things.
just only compliments. How are you, my friend? Are you okay?
I'm good, yeah, I'm very good. And how are you?
We are very anxious for this talk, for this chat. And I think we are Today we will talk a lot about magic, right?
My favorite subject.
Yeah.
How do you start in this patch?
How did I start with magic?
Yes, in magic.
Yeah. Oh, it's a long story.
We love long stories.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So, Rogerio, you've heard me tell this story before, so you'll have to bear with me while I repeat myself. It starts for me. I was brought up Anglican or in the Church of England, so I live in a Christian country. I learned about God when I was 6 or 7, something like that, when I could really comprehend what that idea meant. And I found the idea of Christ very compelling. This idea that a human being, could share the same nature as God. And, the promise of us being the children of God was something that I found to be great news, that we would share the same nature. It wasn't long before I learned that there was only one Christ. And then I thought maybe being a saint would be the next best thing. You get to know God, even if you don't share the same nature. But then, of course, saints only really exist in the past. And then around about this time, I also learned about magicians, wizards in a fantasy setting. So I used to read fantasy novels with wizards, and they sounded suspiciously like the saints or like Christ, right? So there's this idea of the wise man who understands the workings of nature in some fundamental way that most people don't get to share in, right? So the bridge between fantasy and reality occurred when I was about 9 years old. And after reading this fantasy novel that involved a fictional character who was a magician, who inherited the magic of a magician that had come earlier in the history of this book, and was also the evilest black magician that had ever existed. And in the story, this evil black magician who died in the past is trying to take over the body of this younger magician, right? So this is an elaborate setup. So in the playground, I was reading a book of ghost stories from the school library, and I turned a page, and there was a picture of a menacing-looking face, this man with a bald head and a black snake wrapped around his head. I would later learn that's the Orphic egg, isn't it, with the serpent wrapped around it. And it was Aleister Crowley. So it was an image of Aleister Crowley, and it said he was the evilest black magician that had ever lived. Right, and I was simultaneously exhilarated at the thought that he might be able to try and take over my body, whilst also being terrified that he might try and do that. But it was the first time that I had seen adults, like the authors of this book, taking seriously this idea that magic might be real, and it wasn't just something in the fantasy novels. Now, of course, everything in that fantasy novel has more or less come true for me. So I ended up walking in the footsteps of Crowley. A big turning point when I was 15, I found Magic in Theory and Practice in a cheap bookshop that sold end-of-run books, right, at a cheap price. And I had the exact change in my pocket for the price of the book. I wasn't looking for it, it was just there. At 15, I was as deep into that awareness that you cultivate when you're a teenager of social status, where you fit into society, what would be expected of you as an adult human being, that kind of a thing. I was kind of depressed. I grew up very poor. I was aware of my economic status as someone that was poor. So I didn't really have the same kind of materialistic avenues that other people could, move down and have access to, right? So I felt very much trapped in my situation. And of course, magic is something for children, isn't it? It's fantasy stories. It's Harry Potter, right? Yeah. And so as a 15-year-old, I was thinking, do I listen to the voices of my culture and my experience, which tells me that all of this stuff is nonsense, right? Or do I follow something else that's always been there, something that was in evidence when I was having these encounters with the fictional characters in the novels, and then this Aleister Crowley character that came for me in the playground. It seemed like something was unfolding, and even in the fictional story, the young wizard in the fictional story finds this evil black magician's spell book, right? And here it was waiting for me in this shop. And of course, I decided to buy the book. I found it embarrassing buying the book because I wondered what the cashier, the woman working the till, what she would think of a 15-year-old buying a book on magic, taking it seriously. Of course, she probably didn't even register what was happening. She probably just didn't even care. But for me, it was a big deal. And basically, that was the beginning of the path. That was the choice that I made to follow this an inner calling or an inner voice, something else that told me that despite all of the evidence of my senses and my experience and all the voices of my culture, that there was something else more profound. So that was the beginning. And then I got my first job filling it. I was filling bags with soil, right? That was my first job. I had to do 200 a day, right? It did involve sometimes manure. So I do like to say that my first job was literally shoveling shit. but I did that job, and the money that I made from it, I would spend every weekend in a magic shop in Manchester called New Aeon Books. I used to go there and buy whatever I could by Crowley, and I spent a good few years just reading Crowley, having strange experiences, living in a friend's bedroom illegally in his council flat, council estate. that's really where it begins. And then at a certain point, I did move to London, and I joined the IoT, the Illuminates of Phaneteros, Chaos Magic Order, and then that leads me to meeting Duncan Barford. We did the Holy Guardian Angel working together. We did that stuff, and that's where the Baptist Head comes into the picture, and that was us recording our experiences and our practices with magic, and what it is we discovered following that path. But that's a brief introduction. You know, obviously the story goes further than that.
Not that brief.
Yeah, not that brief. I'm trying to make it condensed.
No, please don't do that. Yeah. Because it's always a new story, and you always bring some new elements, and I'm always hearing the same story, but it's not the same story. So,
well, I'm trying to say it in a different way, because even I get bored hearing my.
So let me ask you something. Would you say that your approach to magic is more traditional, especially because you founded an order, and I think we will talk about this in a minute, and your order is defined as a branch of AA. So yes. What I want to know is, how can I put it? Your magical experiments confirmed more results, or results that tend towards to a more traditional magic, or do you think you have an approach to magic that is more modern
or contemporary?
Contemporary, yeah.
Yeah, I used to think that those categories were real. Over the years, I've come to the conclusion that I don't think any of those categories really exist. So I'll explain. So my background was with Crowley. I had an education from Crowley in my teenage years. By the time I was doing chaos magic, I certainly found the DIY approach of chaos magic more accessible than what Crowley talked about. But I was also at the same time aware, or I could appreciate, the impoverished magical perspective that a lot of people had when it came to chaos magic. Given my background with Crowley, I was always surprised that people didn't know certain things or weren't aware of certain things. And it was someone in the Chaos Magic Order that encouraged me to do the Holy Guardian Angel working, but it was presented in a more contemporary fashion, we might say. So the idea was to invoke your future magical self. So just being as evil a sorcerer as I could be, in the sense of, not in the sense of sacrificing children and cursing people, but in the sense of acquiring magical power, right? Yeah. Call to me. Who am I talking to? Like, what have you been up to, Alan? Right. No, yes, accumulating magical power. That was always my thing. I was interested in, like, what is this magic? And like, what is it? And all the stories about magicians, it's always about who's the most powerful.
Yeah. Yes.
And how does that happen? right? So I was interested in magical power. So just being focused on that, being serious about practical magic, the idea was, okay, if I have a certain amount of magical competency now, certain amount of magical power, what will I be like in 10 years or in 20 years or in 50 years? So the idea is you invoke your future magical self as a shortcut to having that magical power now, that magical prowess now, without having to wait, right? So you can see it's the basest way of thinking about an angel or the holy guardian angel is your future magical self. So I did that working, and then that's when everything turned upside down. And suddenly, for the very first time, in terms of magical experience, I wasn't in charge and I was being taken somewhere, right? Now, to come back around to this idea about traditional versus contemporary, at the time I would have said, yes, I'm doing chaos magic. Yes, there's a development over time of the way that we approach magic and that kind of a thing. And you often hear this when people bring up Aleister Crowley performing the Abramelin ritual. So for those people who aren't familiar, there is an author called Abraham von Worms who presented a text from, it's a medieval text, and it's supposed to be a teaching that goes back to Egypt. And he got it from a guy called Abramelin, who taught him this system of magic, which is you invoke a holy guardian angel, then using the power of the angel, you can command demons to do things for you, right? And there's all these magical tablets in there and that kind of a thing. And it prescribes using a room that you consecrate, and then there should be another room, or it does stipulate you can use the outside, but there should be another room covered in sand, and you call the demons into this room, right? So there's this idea that what's required is a lot of money to be able to make this happen, and adhering to a traditional approach to magic, right? So my reaction to that at the time when I was doing the Holy Guardian Angel stuff was to employ some techniques from Austin Osman Spare. So I was kind of already practicing the death posture, but for me, the way that I did it, I thought the posture I will take up is that of the Hanged Man from the tarot card. So I was using posture, and then I was also using sigils as a way of expressing my desire to invoke the Holy Guardian Angel, and then using a visionary means of ensuring that there's an available means of manifestation. There's no point in trying to conjure something if there's no avenue within which it can manifest itself, right? So dreams, visions, you can use mirrors, smoke, sometimes your best friend's body. You can use different ways of making it possible for you to have success with the practice that you're doing, right? Rather than expecting something to just, materialize in front of you. So I thought I was doing a chaos magic approach or something like that. But then going back to the traditional text, what you discover is that Abramelin, he tells you what you need to do is pray. You need to pray every day in a room to God. To God. Yes. Pray to God to send you an angel. And you do that, and it takes about 1.5 years. You do it twice a day, right? You light your candle, you burn your incense, you pray to God. You're going to learn a lot about your motivations for asking for an angel. And you're also going to learn a lot about what you think about your worthiness in terms of God agreeing to do such a thing. So what kind of a person are you, and what is your motivation? You're going to learn all of that doing the prayer. And Abramelin doesn't even give instructions in how to pray. He says you should just make it up. You should do it yourself. If you don't know how to pray, it's never going to work, and there's no point in just learning some words that you repeat. So there's an authentic inner expression, right? And at a certain point, you'll start to be guided by an inner means. This is contact with the angel. Then the angel gives instruction in how to work with the demons, right? So there's an idiosyncratic, authentic approach where you're expressing something that comes first. Your desire to have this contact with God, with an angel, for what purpose? To do what? Right? So all of that will be examined, all of that gets expressed. Then there's an inner guidance, an inner spiritual guidance. Now, of course, Crowley attempted the Abramelin ritual, but he had to abandon it in terms of using the room with the sand and all of that stuff. But guess what he did? He came up with his own personal means of prayer, so he would invoke every day. He did it every day for about 6 months, and then he received an inner guidance in terms of contact with the angel. Well, that's exactly what I did. It's what my friend Duncan did. From the outside, it looks slightly different, the approaches that we took. But these are traditional instructions. These are the traditional instructions. So then I had to wonder, what do these categories mean? Chaos magic, a contemporary approach, a traditional approach. And then, of course, there are other questions around what what people are actually doing when they say they ascribe to these different categories. So with the traditional approach, are people really doing the traditional approach, which would be praying every day and looking for an inner guidance, right? Or are they just working with demons to try and make things happen? Because that's not the traditional approach. And you could even say the same thing happens with chaos magic. What is it that those people are interested in and why they're doing it? Now, one final thing I'll say, because I don't want to talk too long. I want to give you a chance to ask questions, or the thing that I experienced is described very much by Crowley as if you're serious about practical magic, right? If you do that enough, you're gonna end up on the path of the wise. The path of the wise meaning this aimed at God, right? You're gonna be aimed up vertically at the highest thing. Because if you're interested in power, what's the most powerful thing you can think of? Maybe you do some magic and some stuff happens. Okay, but what is that? Where does it come from? So you start aiming up higher and higher, right? And if you take it seriously and you're a genuine black magician, like you really want that magical power, suddenly you end up in a position where you have a relationship with this nature that we're calling God, right? And the difference that I would say, which is demarcated by that line that I talked about in my own experience, where I invoked the angel and then suddenly I discovered I'm not at the top of the pecking order. Suddenly I'm being taken somewhere, right? That I didn't know I'd signed up to it, but suddenly I'm being taken somewhere. That line there, right? Below that line, magic can be taught as a strategy or a technique. You can read a book and learn how to do sigils. You can learn divination, all of this stuff. You can argue about the difference between traditions and categories and approaches, and you can have fashion. So some people wear green robes, some people wear other kinds of spiritual clothing, whatever, right? There's all of that technique. Above that line, we're not talking about being taught anything. It's not about technique. Instead, it's about an inheritance, something promised to you that should you say yes to it, right? You have to make that choice to say yes to it, then it's yours. And that's the sharing in the nature that's of a more profound degree than what we think exists in terms of our own nature, what's available to us. So in some ways, you can think about the application of strategy and technique as something that's making up for an absence, something that we use because we think something is missing. If I don't understand the nature of things, then I have to use strategies to learn about it. So I need to read books and I need to have experiences and so on. But what if all you have to do was say yes to something that's already yours, right? And then the nature of things is already known. It's an inheritance. So does that make sense? But it's an inheritance from another world, not from this one. And it's the call to that inheritance is what leads us on this path of magic. That leads us to the path of the wise, if you like. It's what I find when I look back to my story in the past. Right, I didn't have any. I didn't have the sophisticated language that I have now for talking about it. But what drives me now is the same thing that drove me then, when I was 6, when I was 9, when I was 15. It's the same thing. It's this thread, and it's a promise or something. Yeah.
The silent knowing.
The silent knowing. Yes, that's one way of that I like to describe it. It's that idea that you're looking for something. Right, and you have candidates for what that thing might be that you're looking for, right? But the fact that you already know that you're missing something must mean that you've known it prior. Otherwise, how could you miss it? How can you long for a beloved or a lover? How can you long for that lover if you've never been with that lover? If you don't already know the beloved, you can only miss someone that you're already in love with, right? So this longing, this call to something else, is something that you already know. The thing is, you don't have the words for it, but your entire incarnation, your entire path that you walk when it comes to magic is the putting into words of that silence. It's an expression of it. So one way to think about magic is that it's the art of expressing the human soul and its journey to God.
Yeah.
That's one way of thinking about it, at least in my opinion.
You are talking about the great rituals, really hard work in magic, and nowadays, when we look at social medias, we are living the era of the productivity, and everyone nowadays have to promote themselves and then show a lot of things in internet, and sometimes show magic like a ocus pocus thing, like almost a magic, a magic, a sheep magic, not the really hard work in magic to self knowledge, to reach some divine or to talk with angels. How do you view this phenomenon now? We know as witch talk.
Have you ever heard that? Witch talk?
I have heard of witch talk. Yes, I've heard that. Am I right in thinking it's mainly a teenage girl phenomenon?
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Because if you open TikTok or Instagram or any social media today, even Facebook, you have in each, for example, you pass 3 or 4 posts, and then you see in each corner there is a new magician, a new oraculist, a new people opening tarot cards and saying they can do some magic for you. Everything is offering this and promoting themselves as new occultists and powerful people that can change your future and bring the beloved in 3 days. So how do you see that?
I think, well, I know the reason I've heard of witch talk is because I know that there have been online campaigns, you know, to, I don't know, curse Putin or, I don't know, alter, you know, world events. And of course, the results are lacking. Just as a first step, if the idea is that I don't know, you're going to remove Putin from power using magic, you know, well, that doesn't seem to have worked. So what? how many witch talkers? How many witch talkers does it take to change a world leader? Could we put it like that?
Yeah.
I don't know what the punchline is. Yeah. So I mean, but more broadly, I would say this. It's very easy, and this is a trite thing to say, it's very easy to mistake the appearance of something esoteric for the esoteric, right? But by definition, an appearance is not the thing, right? It's not. Esoteric means hidden. So the biggest trick for people moving in the opposite direction to real magic is everything that presents itself as magic, right? If something looks esoteric, then you think, well, if I dress in that way, or I behave in that way, or I present things in that way, then surely I'm doing that thing. But this is the thing about magic. It will it's a secret that lies in your own heart. It's a secret, and one way of thinking about that is that it's the Holy of Holies in a temple, and it's veiled, and it's only appropriate for certain people to peek behind that veil to see what it is, right? For the safety of the curious person, as well as to what can we say, to make sure that the nature that's found there retains its purity. That might be another way of putting it, right? So it doesn't end up stained or degraded or something like that, right? So it defends itself. That's another way of thinking about it. So it's very much the case that a lot of people engage in magic, and you can see this with magical workings for any practical magicians listening to this, right? You'll have seen this in your own experience, and it's inescapable. You have to do all this practical stuff and all this fashionable stuff first before you get to the other side, right? You have to travel through it. There's no way of getting around it. It's supposed to be there. So I don't want people to mistake my comments, right, to say that you shouldn't do any of this stuff. I would just say take it seriously then. If you're going to do this stuff, like go all in. But if you do a magical working, you have a reason for doing it. You get some magical results. There are synchronicities and symbols and all kinds of things going on, right? Usually when you speak to someone who's done that, or you'll find yourself doing it, right? Like 2 weeks later, that person, if you ask them about the working, they'll be following some kind of symbolic, synchronistic thread, right? That's got nothing to do with the original working. If you're not capable of appreciating that magic is a nature that discloses itself, right? It discloses itself. And if you don't allow it to disclose itself because you want it to be a certain way, or you think you know how it should be, or etc., you end up being spat out. Meanwhile, thinking that you've had success with that magical working, or that you know what magic is. So it's not uncommon, is it, to find even practical magicians that can have 20-year careers where they're just doing the same thing on repeat. They're still doing magic, asking the question, do you think this is real? Like, is this real? Do you think this is real? What about the nature of gods? Do you think are we made them up, or are they real things that we contact? Like, what do you think will happen if we do this? Oh, Kimbanda, I'm going to do a bit of Kimbanda. I'm going to go and do a bit of that. Then now I'm going to go and do a little bit of, I don't know, traditional Catholic grimoire magic. And now I'm going to go and try this thing over here. And it's that experimental attitude is still there. And it's like, well, how can you still be doing something as profound as magic and you're still exactly the same? And that's the best case scenario. Usually what happens is, over a 20-year career, people take a nosedive with magic. Their lives fall apart. They become worse versions of themselves. They do extraordinarily stupid things with disastrous consequences. That's what I've seen. That's what I've seen. That's what happened. Now, there's also another thing I'll say about it as well, and I think this is the more important part of it, because I'm like hand in hand with this idea of like that you can't really profane the secret. You know, you can't peek behind the veil if it's not appropriate. Hand in hand with that is something that I've described in the past as psychophobia. Fear of the mind. And what I mean by the mind is I mean the soul. And by the soul, I mean God. Right? A nature that's yours, that's too good to be true, that is approaching it can be terrifying. So many traditions talk about annihilation of the soul, annihilation of the self, fear of God, these kinds of things. And that's something you have to encounter and travel through in the process, right? So people who there are many people, not everyone obviously, but there are some people who they're interested in things like magic or spirituality or religion or psychology, right? Precisely because they want to keep the reality of those subjects as far away from themselves as possible. So one way of doing that is to present yourself as an expert in that domain. So you learn all about it. You learn all the different ideas, and then you can neatly put them next to each other and talk about how you understand it. And it's to keep the reality of what it promises as far away from you as possible. So that's also involved. That's also involved. So if you're serious, though, like I was saying, if you're serious, you're probably not that concerned with fashion or with the stuff that you see on Witch Talk or whatever it is, because you're pursuing something, you're looking for something. And even if you think the appropriate way of describing the beloved is sheer magical practical ability or power or something like that, right? Eventually you're going to exhaust that as a candidate. And one way of thinking about the process is you have many candidates and you keep narrowing it down until eventually you're going to realize that the candidate that you're looking for is over an horizon, and you're always aimed up in that direction.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I've talked at length there. Did all that make sense?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Please feel free to ask questions, or
And I think this is wonderful because it ends up being a call, as in Austrian Spare, to know our own self through, say, a meditative practice, which ends up revealing our deepest motivations. I had a teacher that once said that something like that: magic and spirituality are not about lighting incense and repeating a mantra whose meaning we don't know. Spirituality and magic means not running away from challenges and facing challenges and difficulties in life head on.
Yeah. I also I just want to say this as well, because I don't want people to get the wrong impression. Whenever you look at traditions, spiritual traditions, in my humble opinion, right, they are at their peak, their highest expression, when they are most denigrated for their magical content. So I'll give you an example. Neoplatonism, which doesn't really exist, it's just Platonism, right? But Neoplatonism, it's often considered at its peak with people like Plotinus, Proclus, right? And at its lowest expression with Iamblichus, right? Why? Because he energized the practice of actually uniting your soul with God, right? Theurgy. He talks about you do the practice and you go through these stages and these things happen to you, right? And it's about magic. That's what magic actually is. That's what magic really is. We think it's just tarot readings or doing a spell or whatever, or this kind of a thing. That's just on the periphery, right? If you, like we've been talking about, if you keep traveling, you'll find something, the most profound thing you can think of, the oldest human tradition that there is, and the most profound and sophisticated expression of human spirituality. That's what's at the center of magic. It's better than all the other traditions, right? Especially those traditions that think you can have meditation and there's no magic. That's not a reality. That doesn't exist. Everything we've talked about in terms of magic, you encounter if you do a meditation practice. Energetics, spirits will turn up, some weird synchronicities. The problem is if you have no appreciation of what magic is, then you can get easily lost. It can even be dangerous in that situation. It happens to meditators all the time. Yes, so I'm always wary of people that denigrate magic, but hopefully it makes sense when I talk about the appearance of the esoteric and what people might be doing when they're indulging that versus what magic really is. Does that make sense? So yeah, I hope that's clear, because sometimes I don't know, maybe people might think that I'm anti-magic or something like that, but you know, my whole tradition is called Magia, which just means magic. Yeah. And it's the old European root word for magic, because that's a way of expressing the fact that it's the oldest tradition that we have.
Actually, in Portuguese, we have the distinction between magic and magia. Magia is a word in Portuguese.
All right. Yeah.
So,
what's the? Yeah.
Yeah. When we talk about magic just with a C, we use mágica. When we are talking about magic with CK, we use magia.
Nice.
Yeah.
To make some difference between the illusions and the real magic, right?
Yeah.
Because we have the magicians and some kind of tricks, and then we have to make this difference.
Well, I've got something else to say that might be controversial. So the stage the stage magician that does tricks.
Yes.
The stage magician is to the practical magician what the practical magician is to the Magia practitioner.
Okay.
So what I mean by that, this is what I mean by that, right? So it's obviously this is a necessary step that's required in global culture, right? In modern culture, where you say there's magic that's just tricks. It's just moving appearances around, right? It's just tricks, card tricks, that kind of a thing for entertainment. But then there's real magic, where you can do these techniques and make things manifest. Like you can change things. Like magic is real. It's actually a real thing, right? That is a necessary thing, because people, we're so divorced from what we might call the other world of spirituality, the reality of it, but we have to say basic things like that. However, if we do a sigil and we get a magical result and we say magic works, that's just another variation of moving appearances around to give the impression of a change where there is none, right? So you do a magical working and you get a real magical result. An entity turns up and you have a conversation with it. It makes a prophecy about something that happens. Or, I don't know, you do your sigil and you get your pay rise at work or whatever it might be. That's what I'm talking about as an illusion, as a moving appearances around to give the appearance of change where there is none. It's why you can have someone who practices for 20 years. They do these magical workings, right? And they're the same, if not worse, than they were when they first begun, because there's no change apart from the illusion that there has been, right? So this is I'm being provocative to say, okay, let's say you do your magic and you get these synchronicities and all these crazy things happen, but what is beyond that? Like, what is that? Like, what is it? So in my book Advanced Magic for Beginners, that I wrote that in my 20s, and it was my best attempt at the time to try and express this or try and provoke people in the same way. But I talk about how I would do magic, I would get magical results. So you do the working, you get the magical result. But then I started to experience results without doing the working. Now, Pete Carroll, the father of chaos magic, advises you just to ignore that, because insanity leads down that route, right? Just stick with formal practice, right? And I appreciate that that can be a good practical orientation, stop people leaving the reservation, you know, like going a bit crazy, with wondering about, you know, if I have a random thought and it manifests, what if I think the wrong thing? Suddenly you're having intrusive thoughts that you shouldn't be having, and there's anxiety and all kinds of stuff, right? So I can appreciate that, but what does it mean to have a magical result with no working? Well, what it implies is that what you're experiencing and then what you do as a magician doesn't fit into that neat little box. You're starting to experience things outside of that practical box, and it's hinting at something. So what is that? And what does it mean? Because it isn't about you, you know, pushing a button to make something happen or turning a hand crank. You know, like, it's not like manipulating a mechanism. Something else is going on. And so what does it mean, and what could it be? And I think I called it in the book the prophetic narrative, but it was an attempt at trying to say this causal view that we have and these debates that we have about how does magic work, that it's the wrong question. It's the wrong question, because there's this, it doesn't seem to be acausal, and there seems to be you know, a preponderance of very strange synchronicities that run through your entire life. So how does that work, and why are they there? You know, why was I exposed to this idea of Christ, then this fantasy magician, then Aleister Crowley, to lead me in this direction? How did that happen? It's pointing at something else. Does all that make sense? So
Yes.
Yeah. So I think you need to encounter magic working. I think you're going to anyway, even if you were just a straight up meditator from some sterilized Eastern tradition that you're practicing in the West, where you think it's just meditation that you're doing. You'll start to experience synchronicities and strange things happening, right? So it's like, what? So what is that? Like, what is that? It's the appearance of change where there is none. So what's beyond it? So what's beyond it? Does that make sense?
Yes, totally.
Yeah. So it's all supposed to be there, and you should definitely do it. But allow it to disclose its own nature. Yeah, allow it to disclose its own nature. The only reason you won't look past the causal view of magic is because you think you shouldn't. You think you know better. You think you're going to impose an idea, and I figured it out, and that's why it's like this, and this is what I'm going to do. What if you don't do that?
Yeah, that's why in some moments you invite us to, okay, just don't make a sigil. Just think about that. Just chart that intention, nature, and experiment things.
Yeah.
Let's try it.
Yeah, so I tried in Advanced Magic for Beginners to, and I don't know how successful I was, but to introduce the reader to a series of exercises, and should they do the exercises and have the experiences, then it goes step by step from a formalized strategy, you know, a technical approach, to showing, oh, maybe it's got nothing to do with mechanism. Maybe it's got nothing to do with a you know, the requirements for a causal model for doing it. Maybe it's got nothing to do with this idea that you have to be in an altered state of mind and that you have to forget about things or something like this. So that's the that was the structure of that book. Yeah, because I started to notice that there were similarities between doing ritual work, you know, and doing a sigil, or things that looked or meditation versus doing a ceremony. These are supposed to be separate things, aren't they? But when you examine it and you go through the step, you start to see that there's this actually just one thing, or it's the same thing. And the traditions have biases and prejudices in terms of what they focus on, but I don't think the categories exist in the way that we think that they do.
Cool. Alan, at some point you mentioned Kimbanda, right?
Yeah.
And did you have some experience with Afro-Brazilian religions?
Yeah, you know, it was a mixed experience. So of course, when we talk about traditions or practices, really we're just talking about humans, right? And humans come in all different shapes and sizes. Some people are corrupt. Some people are bad people.
Yeah.
Some people are good people. I went to the only Kimbanda house that existed in the UK at the time. I don't think there is one now, as far as I know, right? And there was a guy there, and they were all pretty much bad people, the people that I met there. One interesting thing that I'll mention, at this point, I'd already done the Holy Guardian Angel stuff, and I was following this thread. And now the thing about following this thread, you can talk about it as, oh, now you're being carried somewhere that you don't want to go, right? You get taken in a direction and you go through things, right? And that can sound like you're forced to do something you don't want to do. but it's not really like that. It's always an invitation, and you can always say, no, I'm not going to go any further. So you will, following that thread, go into dark experiences, go into dark places, but only if you've said yes to following the thread. So it's not forced on you, right? But if you've said yes, then you can go through hell, right? And you can talk about initiation being, this awful challenge, and it's an ordeal and so on, right? Interestingly, when I was following that thread, and when I went to the Kimbanda house, I don't know how to explain this in a way that can convey the experience, but it was very obvious that if I was free to go in that direction and join that tradition, that lineage, be initiated, this particular, right? But it was very obvious that wasn't where the thread was going. The thread that I was following wasn't found in that tradition, that lineage. So I was free to do it, but the invitation went in a different direction. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I was free. So I thought, I noticed that. I thought that's very curious. Because what often happens in chaos magic is that you have something like the Holy Guardian Angel. Someone will do a Holy Guardian Angel working. Halfway through, they'll decide that it sounds just like some other entity from some other tradition. Then they'll go and do that working, and they conflate them, into a single entity, right? So that there are elements in Kimbanda where I was thinking, is this the same thing? These are the same things, but the path, the invitation was still there, but it was like, you're now not following it if you go in that direction. And I think that spoke to the practical nature of what was going on there, not necessarily the corrupt individuals, particularly the person leading that group. Things like boasting about giving someone cancer because they said bad things about him. Yeah, things of this nature. Now, I've also had other experiences. So I had a student back in the day. She was initiated into a lot of African diaspora traditions, Candomblé, Palomayombe, Santeria, and I did have the good fortune of being invited to participate in someone's initiation into, I think it was more than one thread. It was Candomblé and another, I forget now which tradition it was, but I was invited by the person going through the initiation to be there as their spiritual godfather. They considered me that, given I'd helped guide them through the process of waking up, awakening, that kind of a thing. He was initiated. This other student, she did the initiation, and we did the thing, the cliche. We stayed up all night. We drank an inhuman amount of vodka, brandy, and whiskey, smoking cigars. I got to experience possession. I got to see the reality that the interface between the god or the deity and the human being, why they do that, and why they favor extreme or harsh physical sensation. It's because it directly translates into bliss for them, right? And we did all of that, and then the next day we had no hangovers. I hadn't felt like I'd been up all night. If anything, I felt energized. So I got to see all the reality of that, and how these traditions, they offer something that you often don't find in practical magic in the West. Right? I mean, this is one of the things that some of the people I met in the Kimbanda house found very attractive or enticing, was that they went to the Kimbanda house and then, no, this is real, no doubt about it. There's a room full of spirits. We'll go and meet them. We'll go and talk to them. And the magical results, you can't brush them aside as being merely psychological or something like this, compared to if you just do invocation. If you're doing invocation, I've taken part in a lot of rituals where invocation has been used for different entities, and it can be questionable. Are you faking it to make it? Like what exactly is going on here? Possession in an African diaspora lineage, there's no doubt about it. Yeah. Right? There's no faking that. Like it's yeah. So, but still, even at that time, the thread that I was following was moving in a different direction. So it was an honor to take part, and it was a wonderful thing to experience. But I was aimed at something else higher, that way. Going back to that talk about the highest power, like aimed up. So yes, those traditions have. You could if you're going to be juvenile and rank traditions, you might put chaos magic, in terms of magical prowess, beats other kinds of Western magic, because most Western magicians don't really practice magic. It's a joke. But you have chaos magic, people who actually do magic and look for results. Then you might say African diaspora stuff, even more powerful. But then there's something beyond that African diaspora. There's something beyond gods and deities and demons and whatever. There's something bigger than that. Yes. So, yeah.
Please go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, sometimes there can be this debate about what is the nature of a tradition, or what does it include. Not all traditions include the same thing. Some traditions only go so far and then don't go any further. But at the same time, you have to appreciate what I said about things looking esoteric. So you might say, this tradition, or it doesn't have anything profound like this tradition over here. This one goes, it's more mysticism in this one. It depends on the people involved.
Yeah.
It always depends on the people. It's people. At the end of the day, it's just people. So you may be surprised who you find where. And obviously one of the surprising things is that if you go to the places in the lineages where you think you'll find the most spiritual people, or the most realized people, or the most enlightened people, you discover that it's empty. You don't find anyone there, which is an interesting thing to experience.
Here in Brazil, we use a lot of times these tools that come from the Afro-Brazilian religions. We possession or incorporate. I don't know if you use this term in English, like incorporation, because for us have a difference. Possession is something more forced, like in exorcist. But I don't know, like incorporation is something that you have a connection with that spiritual entity, and then you bring to your body to talk it through your body.
Yeah, my experience absolutely aligns with that. My experience was I'll say the use of the term possession. I think sometimes that's used by magicians to try and convey the intensity or the reality of the experience versus I invoked something. And I felt a little, I invoked Venus and felt a little bit, more loving. And it's like, well, it's very different. It's very different if you're a horse, and you're ridden by something. But that was totally my experience. A particular deity took an interest, and it was like an invitation, and we had a great time. But yes, it just, what can I say? It had that. A personal, devotional, or intimate nature to it, where there's a connection and there's a reason why it's that deity in question and not a different one. Yeah. So there was a very particular one that took an interest in me, and then I was requested to have a conversation with this being out in the forest after, and the invitation was there. I could have pursued that direction, but like I said, I was following something else. But it was a great honor,
Yeah, we have this distinction in Portuguese with possession and incorporation. Mainly, I think, because we have a long and strong tradition in Brazil of Spiritism, which is the lineage of Allan Kardec.
Oh yes,
the French guy. Yes, yeah. It's strong here in Brazil, and they have this distinction. Possession may be something when it happens when you lose your conscience,
right?
Or you lose your control. Yes.
Yeah, you lose control, conscience, you don't remember. Yeah. And in corporation, you have this thin line, which is okay.
It's like a partnership. It's like a partnership between you and the entity. So
this is a great point. So, my experience, I'd lost no consciousness whatsoever, right? There was no consciousness, right? And I'd heard this thing, which is if you're really good at it, or you have a really deep, relationship with the entity in question, right? You lose consciousness and you don't remember anything. And I remember thinking, well, that's not what I experienced. So maybe it wasn't that deep, right? Maybe, right? But I've since come to understand that if you lose consciousness in that situation, that's because trauma's involved. There's something sick. You're sick in some way, and there's something wrong with you. So I've done a working with people who you know, they can do this thing where they're a great vessel for speaking with an entity because they lose all consciousness. Well, you'll find that there's something already parked in there. There's something already in there that shouldn't be in there, right? And that if you lose consciousness, right, there's trauma in the past. Trauma's been used in some way to make that accessible to work with beings of a different nature, right? Whether that's intentional or it comes about some other way. And it's just not it's not a feature of a healthy relationship with any kind of entity of any description. So it's really compelling that you mentioned that difference, that's recognized, you know, that incorporation implies something else, doesn't it, rather than this idea of possession where you lose consciousness and something uses you for a bit and then goes and then you don't remember anything. Yeah, I like that. It's good.
Yeah, I am a person that work with this kind of ritual. I'm every time that I work with this, I'm conscious in the process, and sometimes I'm working and the entity are speaking.
Yep.
And then I'm chatting with the entity inside my head. So, why do you are doing this? Tell me what is this, or how do you do your magic? How do you manipulate the energy of the environment? So is this is why I was talking about the partnership, because if you want to use my body, I want you to know in the process. I want you to learn something in the process. So it's a trade.
Yeah.
Rogério?
Yeah, I just have one more question because I told you, I always tell you that you make us feel so comfortable, and it's like, and I think we need to do that one day, which is to sit, drink a beer or wine, and, and talk personally. Yeah, but I mean, we could talk for hours.
Well, since I told my wife that this is happening, there's a Brazilian audience. She keeps saying we definitely need to do a trip to Brazil.
Yes,
it's the excuse that we need. So,
so I have a question. I know there's a lot of people curious about that, which is your relation and your experience with IoT. When you joined the order, what was like the order, and what made you abandon the order? Was some with Chaos Magic in C?
Yeah, itself. I mean, I've got to say up front, of course, there were some oaths that I had to sign, right, or agree to. So there's only certain things I'll talk about, you know. I do actually take that stuff seriously, you know. So, but I joined in 2005, I think it was, around about that time, and it very was much like what is available to me, what can I do to get good at magic, like to make sure, you know. And up until that point, I'd never told anyone that I was practicing magic or interested in it, because I didn't have the language. I didn't want to have an argument with anyone or try and defend it or anything like that. It was something that was personal and intimate. But it got to that point. I'd moved to London. I had no excuses. Here's this order, and what do? All they do is practice magic. And that's what the order's set up to do, or I mean, it was back then. I've not had much involvement for some time, so I can't speak to it now. But it absolutely was the case that it was set up for facilitating, you know, your growth in practical magic. So you turn up to a meeting. Everyone brings a ritual. You turn up to a meeting. You do the ritual. You're not allowed to criticize someone's ritual. At least this is how it was in the UK, right? I can't speak to other sections either, but you don't criticize, you don't say anything negative about anyone's ritual, right? They bring it and you all do it. But you don't come and then talk for 45 minutes about your favorite pet theory or whatever. It's just do the magic. Say what it is that you want, we do the thing, and then we can see whether it happens or not. You know, next time we meet up, we can talk about it. But you get, let's say you bring a ritual, you know, as a beginner, you're going to be a little bit embarrassed. You're going to be unsure of yourself. You're going to be uncertain. But that's what you need. You need a supportive environment where you get to do that. You're forced to do it, but you also get to see other people who are competent at doing it, who've been doing it much longer. And then you see how they do it. And it's and then you get to learn what works in ritual and what doesn't. You know what? I mean, part of it as well is the experience that you have doing a ritual. So they can be fun. You know, you can have fun doing it. Some of my rituals were obviously thinly veiled excuses to get people to do stupid things because I thought it was funny. But it's set up in that way. So that's what it's about. You just do the magic. Do the magic. Do you get a result? Yes or no? Like, or what comes from it? And it was basically, I mean, that's an extraordinary thing. You don't find it. At least I've never heard of another organization that's set up in that way. Usually it's about going through grades and learning things and that kind of a thing. So that's what it gave me an education, right? And everything that I wrote in Advanced Magic for Beginners comes out of my experience doing that. Now, of course, no one can do the work for you, and some people do more work than others, and that kind of a thing. But it's where I met Duncan. We did a lot of stuff together. It informed the Baptist Head. The direction we ended up going up in, the direction we ended up moving in, you would say doesn't necessarily align with some of the values you see expressed by chaos magic. You know, like nothing is true, everything is permitted, that kind of a thing. And one of the things that seemed obvious to me after doing all this magical stuff is that there's a universal structure to things, and it doesn't matter what you think about it, it's there. It doesn't matter what you believe, it's still there, right? And you can let it disclose its own nature, you know. And that's why with Advanced Magic for Beginners, I tried to reintroduce this idea of truth or experiencing truth. So not a spoken truth, but a direct experience or encounter with something. You know, either you're wearing your shoes or you're not. Either you know, you're either an entity's talking to you in your mind whilst you're speaking on its behalf and you're asking it questions, or it's not. Like what's occurring there? So it's at a very base level of just making sense of your experience and letting it disclose itself and honoring the integrity of your own experience first and foremost before you draw conclusions about it. Right. So that's what I mean by truth, experience, and truth. Funnily enough, that's what a ritual is. You arrange appearances in such a fashion that you have this direct experience of what it is. You can talk about it as being what it is that you want to occur, but you're drawing a direct conclusion about an arrangement of details, and then it happens, right? So, so what was the question? What was the question again? Oh, IoT, right.
IoT, right.
Rogerio, you're muted. Right, yes, sorry. So, yeah, so that was my experience in the IoT was that we started following this path. I felt like these things had to be honored, right? And you would think that maybe chaos magicians might say, well, we disagree with you, that kind of a thing. Just not that way. Not that way. Now, maybe it speaks to the section as it was when I was a part of it, and the people, because it's always people. It's just a group of people, right? Maybe it speaks to them as people. Maybe it speaks to something about the kind of people that are attracted to that kind of work. But no one really cared. I once lectured a room of chaos magicians, most of them IoT, British IoT, telling them they were all narcissists, postmodern narcissists, and that there was this thing called truth and that you could pursue it with the practice. They all just clapped and cheered, thought it was great, and just carried on their business as usual. Yeah, so it was like just a supportive environment where anything goes, even you know, criticizing that approach in and of itself, that was even accommodated. So I mean, for me, I was very much involved doing the practical stuff. At a certain point, things changed. The person that was in charge of the order, the section, he retired, we might put it that way. Certain things came to an end, then certain things changed, but it also aligned with the fact that certain magical workings that I'd done with my friend Duncan that are catalogued in or described in the Baptist Head, they culminated in a certain event where I went traveling. I went to India, met a guy there. There were some prophecies about what would happen in that situation, and they all came true. And basically what happened is, post 2009, my preoccupation with magic as an expression of understanding the fundamental nature of things or honoring what came before, that kind of thing, all that fell away. And all I was interested in was the reality of spiritual realization, or what we call the great work, or what you're going to encounter if you take magic seriously. I wanted to know what that is. Like, what is that? So I went through this process. Someone asked me if I could take them through the same process after reading the Baptist Head. So I was invited to teach, right? Which turns out to be that's the traditional way of doing things. The guy was he was a Zen priest. He'd been part of a monastery, like studied for 12 years in Japan or whatever, but he hadn't experienced Kensho. So, and he said, could I help him with that? So that's how I started guiding others through the same process. People came from lots of different traditions, and I basically spent 10 years doing that. So what I was interested in merely changed, and it wasn't that I left the IoT. I'm technically still a member. It's just my what I was interested in had changed, if you can put it that way. And then I spent 10 years, 10, 15 years, something like that. Every day, that's what I did as a job, put it that way, is just help guide people through the process, same process over and over and over again. I tried to express what it is that I was doing, best way of understanding it, but I always felt like it wasn't quite fully expressed yet or articulated. It reached a peak with me doing the best attempt that I was capable of doing. I had a research program, an interactive gamified learning website with 130 videos, all of this stuff. And again, it's funny, in the background, it was always, where is the Western lineage? Where is that tradition? I want that tradition. There's Buddhism, there's Sufism, there's all these other traditions. Where's the Western one? There's just some books you can read, and then there's some sigils. I want a lineage. So I was preoccupied with that, and my best attempts failed. And I'd reached the point where I ended up doing a retreat in Greece just because I thought it was a cool place to do it. Small number of students. I had nothing left to say, nothing left to offer that was mine. And I just thought, if I sit here for the entire retreat and say nothing, then that's what will happen. I've got nothing to say. And then it turned out I had a lot to say. So this had been predicted in the magical working. It's a prophecy that I was going to deliver a book, put it that way. And that's what the Magia text is. It's basically, it's basically the content of that retreat, which is available free as audio files, MP3s, on my website, barbarouswords.com, if people want to listen to the original retreat. So basically, I got something better than I could have come up with. Something that I was always going to deliver, because it goes back to my childhood. Even the name itself goes back to that fantasy wizard that I talked about. It was his surname. It gets more complicated. So there were some big magical workings along the way. At one point, we were told back in 2009, I think it was, that someone had something for me. This person turned up. They gave it me. It was an initiation into the AA, Crowley's Arcanum Arcanorum. It was handed down through this Nath lineage. He handed it to me. People dispute the moral character of these people, or whether it even happened, or all this other stuff. But that was contained in the prophecy. I was told I'd get it from some how can I put it? People of questionable character. You could put it that way. It was contained in there. I don't know why I got the initiation at the time. I thought any attempt at honoring an institution from the past with an historic connection missed the point, because the lineage isn't limited to a human expression. It's the lineage behind lineages. It's the tradition behind traditions. It goes where it wants to go. It's a living thing. It gives birth to traditions, human traditions. Then it moves on, does whatever it wants to do. And it's the it's the spirits or the divine that does the initiating, not people. So at the time I didn't really get it. But I went through it. I went through with the formality of being given this initiation, right? And then 7 years later, 9 years later, whatever it is, the book had come out, and then it was obvious that what I needed to do was found a lineage then, based on the AA, based on Crowley's structure. Not what I wanted to do. I wouldn't have done it. I didn't want anything to do with anyone online who had anything to do with Crowley or Thelema or occultism or witch talk or any of that stuff. I've got no interest. I'd be happy just students come, I'll work with those students. It's nice and quiet, no big song and dance. It just is what it is, and we'll do that privately. But no, it's like, I need to do that. I need to go and stick my head in the bucket of shit that is online occultism. Right, so I did that. And then things came out of that I wasn't expecting, but I don't have to guess at what it is that I need to do. I'm just still following the same invitation. And so that led to the Ordo Magia. So there's no money involved. That was one of the things that was part of Crowley's structure. No money involved. There's only 3 grades in my expression of it. This is all in line with his original instructions, right? It's the same process. It's all expressed in terms of Magia practice, and that way of talking about it. So it doesn't look thelemic. It doesn't have any of the hang-ups of any of that stuff. But it's the same. But it is. It is Thelema, right? So again, we're back to that thing of things looking esoteric, and then the reality of it, right? Yes. So that's how I ended up founding this lineage. Yeah. So I always knew that that's what I was interested in doing, but it took me exhausting all of my best attempts. Everything I thought I needed to do, I had to exhaust all of that and travel through it before I could then have something that would express what it is that I was looking for, and in a way that I couldn't have guessed. Right, and it's better than I thought it could have been. Yeah. So now it's 1 year since I started the order, and all 3 grades are populated. For a long time, there's been too many people to work with. All I've been doing is doing calls with people, sponsoring them. But it's getting there. We had the first order meetup in the UK. I think it was like a couple of weeks ago, and that was great. So yeah, so it's all going well.
Great. Alan, we are coming to an end, and I have a last question to you. And in your experience, what would you say to someone who is starting to study magic and is afraid?
And is afraid?
Yeah, because it's a big problem that we see at the start of the study of the magic. A lot of people have some fear about to study too, because of the consequence, because of the the 3 laws of magic and a lot of bullshits about magic.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, first of all, if I was being hardline, right? I was being hardline. One way of thinking about this whole thing, right, is that appearances will be dissuasive. They will tell you not to go in that direction. If you need encouragement to go in that direction, you shouldn't be going in that direction, because you won't make it. If you need appearances to be nice and cozy, right, you won't make it. If you're easily swayed by strong impressions, don't go near it. Best not to go near it, right? Like I mentioned, my own experience was my presentation of magic was, here's the evilest person you can imagine, right? Sacrifice kids, tortured cats, right? Right. Do you want this? Do you really want this? I mean, I remember looking at that picture of Aleister Crowley and reading the silly tabloid stories about him, right? I'm a 9-year-old. I'm reading that. I just thought it was true. And I thought, how could a human being do that? But magic's real. This dude's, where's his book? I want his book. I want to be like the wizard. Where's his, right? For the longest time, I practiced magic, and I mean, my life was filled up with learning about it and doing the practices. Until I was 25, I never spoke about it to a single person, because I didn't know how to express it. I didn't want to have to defend it. I just knew I'd found what I was looking for, and I had to go in that direction. Now, I didn't appreciate this at the time, but of course, it's the way things have to be, that everything in this world will dissuade you from going in that direction, right? That's not a coincidence. It's not an historic thing where at other times maybe it'd be more persuasive. Even if the entire culture was filled with superstition and temples and whatever, it'd be the same thing. Moving in that direction, it's going to be dissuasive, right? In magic itself, right? If there's anyone who's going to murder the reality of magic, yeah, it's the magician. It's the people who claim to speak on its behalf. They're the ones that murder it. This is true in every tradition, by the way. It's like the worst enemy of Christians is another Christian, right? The worst enemy of Islam is a Muslim. Like, it's always in your tradition. The people who will murder the reality of it are the people who claim to speak on its behalf. That's always, it's always like that. So if I was being hardline, it was like, you know what? If you're just dabbling, if you're not willing to move beyond your preferences in terms of, like, let's say you've heard silly stories and there's some fear about trying an Ouija board or something like this, right? If you can't allow that fear to be there, but you're not willing to see beyond it. Well, I'm going to see what the case might be, right? Then you're not doing magic anyway. But you're set up to fail if you're not going to do that. And then here's the other thing as well. If you're willing to look to see, regardless of what you think, how you feel, if you're willing to look to see, if something bad is there, you acknowledge that, and then you don't do that again. Like you adjust, don't you? Yeah. A lot of people don't. So I mean, to me, I would say this: allow, and this is in any domain. If you have fear about something, allow that fear, that darkness, to disclose its own nature. What is it? Even the things that we fear, like the nature of the fear itself and what it is that we're scared of, has an intelligence of its own. And so we'll let that express itself. Let's see what the whole picture is, right? And then if it is something evil or terrible or whatever, then you know that, right? But you've traveled past it because you've kept your eyes open. So I would say orientation is everything. Are you called to it? If you're called, you're going to do it anyway. Doesn't matter what anyone says to you. Even if the fear tells you not to do it. You know, if you're really called,
I celebrated when you said that. I don't know if Leo will be with me in that, because I was deeply abused in a religious order, in a community. And today I think part of my work with my publishing house is to help people to develop their own authenticity in magic and to pursue their own way, because encouragement was the main element they used to manipulate. They need to encourage us, and they use our fear and our sense of not being enough, of not doing enough. We have to surpass our limits and to go beyond them. This kind of thing, I think, is used a lot by people who are committing abuses, spiritual abuses. So that's why I celebrated when I said that. That's a cool thing.
Yeah. But I would also say, you know, on a very surface level as well, surface level.
Yeah.
I mean, the answer to, you know, if someone does have fear in that way, because sometimes people indulge fears. You don't need to indulge fear. It can be there, and there's a difference between it being there and you indulging it, isn't there? Right.
Yeah.
Again, it does come back to the same orientation that I talked about. Even if we can think of it as a strategy, which is if someone's told you something about it, how do you know it's true? Just how do you know it's true? So you can look for yourself. Yeah. You can look for yourself, but keep your eyes open.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Rogério, you are translating Alan's work to Portuguese, right? And you are started a crowdfunding for this, right?
Yes,
can you talk about?
Of course. Campaign is on. We already reached almost 70%. So first of all, we are bringing advanced magic for beginners, and together with it, we are publishing some chapbooks with other aspects of Alan's work.
I received my Phil Heine material. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Great. Thank you. You see it?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Yeah. This is Advanced Magic for Beginners. The campaign is to publish this one book mainly, but together with it, we are releasing 3 chapbooks. So we have the first one, The Camel Rides Again. The second one is The Blood of the Saints. The Blood of the Saints is the name of the first book Alan published with Duncan. So we chose some essays of the book. And 3 Steps to Heaven, an introduction material Alan used to give to people in their courses, right?
The talk that I mentioned that I gave to Chaos Magicians, this is what I gave out at the end, 3 Steps to Heaven. Yeah, because I didn't want to berate them. I wanted to tell them what they could do about it, you know, what the next step might be. So that was a handout that I did. I put 3. I thought, what's the most basic way of understanding how you make that transition that I talked about from a strategy or a set of techniques to something you inherit, which can't be taught.
Yeah.
How do you make that transition? So 3 Steps to Heaven, that's what that is.
Yeah. So that's the material. Next year, we're publishing Magia, which is I'm translating now, and so, but this is poetry. This is poetry and philosophy at the same time. So it's very hard to translate, and I'll probably have a lot of conversations with Alan about some stuff. And so next year we get to Magia.
Cool, very cool. And Alan will be in the Sophia, the Symposium of Occultism and Arcane Philosophies. Will be in the next October. And Alan, did you record a lecture to the symposium, right?
Yeah, we had was it a round table? Is that the right term?
Yes.
Yeah.
Was a round table, right?
Yeah, it was a nice conversation.
Cool. So for you that will be in the symposium, you will have access to the lecture from Alan. Alan, thank you very much for the conversation. Was very, very rich, and we are hoping that you can come here to Brazil to present to you some macumba or magical here in Brazil.
Yeah, nice. Thank you for inviting me, Leo. Thank you, Rogerio.
Thank you, Alan.
So
thank you, Leo, for receiving us and helping us to promote
my pleasure.
Alan's work. Thank you very much.
It was my pleasure. So I will finish in Portuguese, right? For our audience. So, pessoal, mais uma entrevista aqui no canal. O material do Alan vai estar disponível aí pela Palimpsestos, lá no catarse.me/Chapman. E nós vamos ter o Simpósio Sofia agora em outubro, 13, 14, 15 de outubro. Então, corre para se inscrever, porque quem tiver inscrito vai ganhar a palestra do Chapman, assim como a do Phil Heine também, que já está gravada. Então, estejam todos convidados. Thank you very much, Alan. Thank you very much, Rogério.
Thank you.
And bye-bye.
Bye-bye.